All right, buckle up because today we're wading into some seriously murky legal territory. Louisiana law and how something you did as a kid, specifically a felony, could still affect you now as an adult.
Yeah, it's a question we get a lot, actually. People figure what happened in another state stays there. But Louisiana has some pretty specific rules about this, especially when it comes to repeat offenders.
And that seems to be what's got you curious, right, listener? Whether Louisiana courts can use a past felony conviction, even one from another state, to increase a potential sentence now. Like they can hold it against you, even though it happened somewhere else.
Right, and it gets even more complicated because you're talking about something that happened when you were a juvenile, which Louisiana treats much differently than cases where someone was an adult at the time of the offense.
Okay, so multiple layers here. We're dealing with different states, different sets of laws, and the whole juvenile factor. So where do we even begin to untangle all of this?
Well, a good place to start is with Louisiana's Habitual Offender Statute, officially known as LAR-RS 15.529.1. Basically, it gives prosecutors the power to seek a harsher sentence if you've been convicted of multiple felonies. Kind of like a three-strikes rule, though it's not always that cut and dry.
So someone's committed multiple felonies. Louisiana might really throw the book at them.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
But here's where things get tricky for you. Using juvenile convictions in those situations gets really complicated.
So just because someone got in trouble as a kid doesn't automatically mean Louisiana can use that against them later on down the line.
Not necessarily. And to really understand why, we have to look at a key case. State v. Brown, decided by the Louisiana Supreme Court back in 2004. This case set a major precedent for how Louisiana handles its own juvenile convictions.
So State v. Brown is like our North Star for this deep dive.
Exactly. The court in that case ruled that if someone was found guilty in a Louisiana juvenile court, and this is important, if they didn't have a jury trial as a juvenile, the prosecution can't use that to try to get them a longer sentence as an adult.
Okay, wait a second. Back up for a minute. Why does having a jury trial as a kid even matter?
Well, because in Louisiana, juveniles don't automatically have the right to a trial by jury like adults do. Sometimes it's just a judge making the final decision in juvenile court. So State v. Brown basically said it would be unfair to use a case against you in adult court if you weren't given all the same rights as an adult back then, including that right to a jury trial.
So that makes sense for cases that happen in Louisiana, but what about our listener with that case in Texas? It seems like things might get even trickier with these out-of-state convictions.
You're right, it does get more complicated, and this is where Louisiana throws kind of a curveball. They actually look at how that other state handled the case.
So walk me through this. How does that work exactly?
Let's say, just as an example, that you were convicted of a felony in Texas as a teenager, right? Even if Louisiana wouldn't have charged you as an adult for that because of your age, if Texas did, then Louisiana courts will usually follow their lead.
Wait, really? Just because Texas said it was okay to treat you as an adult?
Pretty much, yeah. The Louisiana Supreme Court addressed this in a case called State v. Youngblood.
Yeah.
And basically what they said was, if that other state treated you as an adult with all the legal rights and procedures of an adult, then Louisiana will likely treat you the same way, even if Louisiana might have done things differently if it had happened here.
Whoa, okay, that's a real curveball. So for our listener, that Texas felony conviction could actually really come back to haunt them. I mean, we're talking potentially longer sentences, tougher plea deals if it goes that far. This is where understanding this stuff gets really important.
Absolutely. And to really emphasize this point, there are the cases out there just like yours. The case of State v. Bush, for example, back in 1999. That involved convictions from Florida when the guy was just 16. And guess what? The Louisiana court used them against him as an adult, even though the original crimes happened when he was technically a juvenile.
So, let me make sure I've got all this straight. We're saying out-of-state convictions where the person was treated as an adult. Louisiana says those are fair game. But juvenile cases within Louisiana without a jury trial, that's when things get tricky. Have I got that right so far?
You got it. But, like with any good legal thriller, we've got one more twist to add to the mix.
Oh, I had a feeling there was a but in there somewhere. What is it?
Don't forget about the Louisiana Administrative Code, specifically LAF Admin Code, TIT, 22, PTIX, Section 205. This section actually says that any past felony adjudications from juvenile court should be considered during sentencing, at least in some capacity.
Hold on, wait. You're saying they do look at juvenile adjudications? That seems like it contradicts what we just talked about with State v. Brown. I'm so confused.
And that's precisely why understanding all these little nuances of the law is so important. See, the Administrative Code doesn't actually specify if those juvenile adjudications can be used to increase a sentence under this specific habitual offender statute. They might be considered, but whether they can be used for an enhanced sentence is a whole other can of worms.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see why lawyers exist. This feels like one of those one word can change everything situations.
Oh, absolutely. And for you, listener, it means we need to explore how Louisiana courts might view cases where a juvenile was tried as an adult in Louisiana itself.
So we're talking about the situations where even though someone is under 18, they still end up in adult court in Louisiana for whatever reason. That happens sometimes, right?
It does, for certain serious offenses, and while your research didn't include any cases that directly address this specific scenario, we can make some educated guesses based on what we've learned so far.
Okay, let's put on our detective hats then. What clues do the cases we've already discussed give us?
Well, I think it's interesting how much emphasis Louisiana puts on how that other state handled your case. Like if they treated you as an adult, Louisiana tends to follow suit. So would it stand to reason then that if a Louisiana court itself decided to handle a case in adult court, even if the offender was underage at the time, that would probably be fair game later on?
So it's like they're saying, look, the juvenile justice system, that's different. That's about rehabilitation, giving young people another chance. But once you're in adult court, all bets are off.
Right, exactly. It's an acknowledgement of the seriousness of the offense and that the consequences are different in adult court. Now, to be clear, the Louisiana Supreme Court, they haven't actually ruled on this exact scenario. We're kind of reading between the lines based on the cases you found.
Which is why you always hear, talk to a lawyer. Right. Because even with all this research, there's still some gray area.
Oh, 100%. That's what lawyers are for, to help you navigate the gray.
Okay, so if I'm keeping track correctly, we've got these two main scenarios. Out-of-state convictions where the person was treated as an adult. Louisiana says those are fair game. And then, based on our sleuthing, it seems likely that if a Louisiana court decided to treat someone as an adult for something they did as a juvenile, that could also come back later.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it sort of highlights a point that I think is often lost in these conversations about the law. And it's the intent behind the juvenile justice system, right?
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to be about rehabilitation, recognizing that young people, they make mistakes, and we want to give them the opportunity to learn from them and become productive members of society.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, imagine being held back your whole life by something you did as a teenager. That's not exactly a recipe for personal growth.
Not at all. And, we've been laser focused on Louisiana this whole time, but it does make you wonder, how many other states have similar laws on the books?
Oh, man, could you imagine? Like, you move across the country thinking you've put the past behind you, and then bam, an old case comes back to bite you.
And that's why knowledge is power, right? Especially when it comes to the law. What we've done today with your case is a perfect example. You had a question, you did your research, you've got a better understanding of how Louisiana courts might handle your situation, but, and this is a big but, this is for informational purposes only. This isn't legal advice.
Exactly. Don't go running off to court without talking to an actual attorney.
Right. Every case is different, and a qualified lawyer can look at your unique circumstances and all those convictions from Texas and figure out the best course of action for you. Because, let's be real, this stuff can have very real implications for your life.
No kidding. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Out-of-state convictions, in-state cases, the whole juvenile versus adult court thing. But there was one other little detail in your research that I want to circle back to. You remember that state VSLD case? It seemed to suggest that maybe past convictions are always considered during sentencing, even if they don't technically count for making the sentence longer under the habitual offender law. Do you remember what that was all about?
Right. It's like every time you think you've got a handle on this stuff, some other little detail pops up.
Yeah.
To go about that state VSLD case, I was kind of hung up on that one too. Did it mean that even if a past conviction doesn't actually make your sentence longer under this habitual offender law, it could still be brought up in court? Could they still use it against you?
It's a good question, and you're right to be asking it. The SLD case does raise an interesting point about sentencing in general. It shows that judges do sometimes consider your whole legal history, even if something doesn't meet those really specific requirements of the habitual offender statute. Okay, but here's what I remember about that SLD case. We didn't actually know for sure when those past convictions they were talking about had happened. We didn't know if they were from when the defendant was a juvenile or an adult.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And that's why, we have to be super careful about jumping to conclusions. Context is everything in law. And the SLD case might have just been about an adult with a long rap sheet.
Okay.
We don't really know for sure based on what you found.
So, as frustrating as it is, we can't really say one way or the other if that state VSLD case is relevant to our listener's situation. But even though we've hit a few dead ends, I feel like we've done a pretty good job mapping out the territory, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've really gotten into the weeds with the Louisiana Habitual Offender Statute, looked at how courts view those out-of-state convictions, how they handle juvenile adjudications. We even got into the bigger picture of what the juvenile justice system is all about.
And honestly, just the fact that you're out here asking these questions, doing this research, that's huge. It means you're taking control of your situation, which is so important.
It really is. When you understand your situation, when you have the knowledge, it empowers you to make better decisions about your own future. You're not just going in blind.
Exactly. And that actually brings me to what I think is the biggest takeaway for our listener today. Having an experienced Louisiana attorney in your corner is just, it's absolutely essential in a situation like this.
100%. I can't emphasize that enough. No matter how much research you do on your own, there is no replacement for getting personalized advice, legal advice from somebody who really knows the ins and outs of Louisiana law. They can look at your case, look at those old convictions from Texas, and help you figure out the best way to move forward.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, listener, it's been a wild ride through the twists and turns of Louisiana law, but hopefully you're feeling a little more informed and a lot less alone in all of this. Just remember, everybody's legal situation is unique, so don't take any of this as actual legal advice.
Right. Think of this as a crash course, not your legal strategy session. If you've got questions about your own situation, definitely reach out to a qualified attorney near you.
Yes, 1,000 times, yes. Until next time, keep those brains engaged, folks, and we will catch you on our next deep dive. Who knows what we'll uncover next?